Staff Sergeant Jessica Thompson stood in the middle of the Fort Benning tank training field, her hands trembling as she tried to remember the basic steps of tank gunnery procedures. The M1A2 Abrams loomed before her, its massive 120mm main gun seeming to mock her every move. Around her, other trainees moved with confidence, their hands steady and their movements precise. Staff Sergeant Thompson called out Master Sergeant Davis, his voice carrying across the training field. "What's taking so long? This is basic tank operations." Jessica's face flushed with embarrassment as she fumbled with the fire control system. Her mind was blank, her training seemingly evaporated. The other trainees were watching now, some with concern, others with barely concealed amusement. This was supposed to be her element, her specialty, but she was failing spectacularly. "Sergeant, I'm having trouble with the targeting procedures," Jessica admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Master Sergeant Davis walked over, his expression a mix of frustration and disappointment. "Staff Sergeant, you've been here for 3 weeks and you're still making rookie mistakes. How do you expect to command a tank in combat if you can't handle basic gunnery?" Which city are you watching from? Share it in the comments. Maybe someone else from your city is here too. And remember, if you believe heroes appear in the most unexpected ways, hit subscribe and give this video a like. The truth was, Jessica Thompson was not who she appeared to be. Her service record showed a basic armor background, a few years of garrison duty, and a transfer to Fort Benning for advanced tank commander training. But that record was a carefully constructed fiction, designed to hide a past that the Army had decided was too politically sensitive to acknowledge. Jessica Thompson was actually one of the most decorated tank commanders in recent military history. She had served 3 tours during Desert Storm, leading M1A2 Abrams tanks in some of the most intense armored engagements of the war. She had destroyed over 15 enemy tanks, earning a Silver Star, an Army Commendation Medal with Valor, and numerous other decorations. But her most significant achievement, the one that had forced her into hiding, was being the first female tank commander to successfully lead a tank company in a major armored battle. The battle had taken place during the second day of the ground offensive. Her company had been tasked with securing a key highway intersection that was defended by a battalion of Iraqi T-72 tanks. The mission was supposed to be impossible. The enemy had superior numbers and were fighting from prepared defensive positions. Jessica had volunteered to lead the attack herself. She had spent hours studying the terrain, analyzing enemy positions, and coordinating with supporting artillery and air assets. When the time came, she had led her company of 14 M1A2s into the engagement, using superior tactics and firepower to defeat an enemy force 3 times their size. The battle had been a complete success, but it had also exposed a problem that the Army wasn't ready to face. Jessica Thompson had proven that women could perform at the highest levels of armored warfare, even in the most intense combat situations. But instead of being celebrated for her achievements, she had been quietly reassigned, and her record had been sanitized. The official explanation was that her presence in combat zones had been a mistake, a bureaucratic error that had allowed a woman to serve in a role that was technically forbidden to her gender. The truth was more complicated. Jessica Thompson had been too successful, too visible, and her continued presence in armored combat had threatened the delicate political balance that kept women out of direct combat roles. So she had been sent to Fort Benning, given a new identity, and told to keep her mouth shut. She was supposed to be just another trainee, learning skills that she had already mastered years ago. But the training was designed for people who had never commanded tanks in combat, and Jessica found herself struggling to remember the artificial procedures that had been drilled into her during basic training. The real Jessica Thompson would have known exactly what to do with that fire control system. She would have acquired the target, calculated the firing solution, and destroyed it with a single shot. But the Jessica Thompson who was supposed to be here, the one with the sanitized record, was supposed to be learning these skills for the first time. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Master Sergeant Davis said again, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I need you to demonstrate proper target acquisition technique, right now." Jessica took a deep breath and tried to focus. She had to remember what she was supposed to know, not what she actually knew. She had to be the person her record said she was, not the person she really was. "Sergeant, I understand the theory," Jessica said, trying to sound confident, "but I'm having trouble with the practical application." Master Sergeant Davis's expression softened slightly. "I understand this can be overwhelming, Staff Sergeant, But you need to push through it. In combat, you won't have time to think. You'll need to act on instinct. If only you knew, Jessica thought. Her instincts were honed by years of real armored combat, but she couldn't use them here. She had to pretend to be learning skills that were second nature to her. The training continued throughout the day, with Jessica struggling through each exercise. She was supposed to be learning how to acquire targets, how to calculate firing solutions, how to coordinate with other tanks in formation. But every time she tried to perform these tasks, her real training took over, and she had to force herself to make the mistakes that a rookie would make. It was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Jessica was constantly fighting against her own instincts, trying to remember to do things the wrong way. She had to remind herself to hesitate, to second-guess herself, to ask for help when she knew exactly what to do. By the end of the day, Jessica was physically and emotionally drained. She had spent hours pretending to be incompetent at tasks that she had mastered years ago. She had watched other trainees struggle with procedures that she could perform in her sleep, and she had been unable to help them. As she walked back to her barracks that evening, Jessica couldn't help but wonder how long she could keep this up. How long could she pretend to be someone she wasn't? How long could she watch people struggle with problems that she could solve in seconds? The answer came the next morning, during a complex tank gunnery exercise. The scenario involved engaging multiple moving targets while coordinating with other tanks in formation. Jessica was assigned to lead a platoon of 4 tanks, and she was supposed to struggle with the basic procedures. But as she approached the first target, something in her snapped. She couldn't watch her platoon struggle with tank gunnery when she knew exactly how to lead them. Her training took over, and she began commanding the platoon with the skill and confidence of a seasoned tank commander. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Master Sergeant Davis called out, his voice sharp with surprise. "What are you doing?" Jessica looked up, realizing that she had slipped into her real persona. She had been commanding the platoon with the precision and speed of someone who had done this hundreds of times in real combat. She had been moving with the confidence of someone who had led tanks in battle. "I'm following the procedures, Sergeant," Jessica said, trying to sound uncertain. Master Sergeant Davis walked over, his eyes narrowing as he watched Jessica work. "You're moving too fast, Staff Sergeant. You're supposed to be learning these procedures, not performing them like a veteran." Jessica forced herself to slow down, to make the mistakes that were expected of her. But it was too late. Master Sergeant Davis had seen something in her movements, something that didn't match her supposed experience level. The next day, Jessica was called into Master Sergeant Davis's office. The older man was sitting behind his desk, a file open in front of him. Jessica could see that it was her service record, but she knew it was the sanitized version. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Master Sergeant Davis said, his voice serious. "I've been reviewing your file, and I have some concerns." Jessica's heart began to race. Had she been discovered? Had someone recognized her from her previous assignments? "Sergeant?" "Your movements yesterday, during the gunnery exercise," Master Sergeant Davis continued. "They were too precise, too confident. You moved like someone who had done this before, many times." Jessica tried to keep her expression neutral. "Sergeant, I've been studying the procedures very carefully. I want to be the best tank commander I can be." Master Sergeant Davis nodded slowly. "I understand that, Staff Sergeant, but there's something else. Yesterday, when you were commanding that platoon, you used techniques that aren't taught in basic training. They're advanced procedures, ones that are only taught to experienced tank commanders." Jessica felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had used techniques that she had learned during her second tour in Desert Storm, techniques that had saved the lives of her entire platoon when they had been ambushed by enemy tanks. She had used them without thinking, her training taking over completely. "Sergeant, I don't know what you're talking about," Jessica said, trying to sound confused. "I was just following the procedures I learned in class." Master Sergeant Davis leaned back in his chair, studying Jessica carefully. "Staff Sergeant Thompson, I've been training tank commanders for 20 years. I know what a rookie looks like, and you don't look like a rookie. You move like someone who has been in combat, who has led tanks in battle, who has made life-and-death decisions in real time." Jessica's mind was racing. She had to think of something, some explanation that would satisfy Master Sergeant Davis without revealing her true identity. "Sergeant, I have a photographic memory. I can remember procedures after seeing them once. Maybe that's why I seem more confident than I should be." Master Sergeant Davis's expression didn't change. A photographic memory might explain your knowledge of procedures, Staff Sergeant, but it doesn't explain your confidence under pressure, your ability to make split-second decisions, or your instinctive understanding of armored warfare. Jessica was running out of options. Master Sergeant Davis was too experienced, too observant. She was going to figure out the truth sooner or later. The question was, what would happen when she did? Staff Sergeant Thompson, Master Sergeant Davis said, his voice becoming more serious. I want you to know that whatever you're hiding, whatever the reason for this deception, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to train you, to make sure you're ready for whatever the Army asks of you. Jessica looked up, meeting Master Sergeant Davis's eyes for the first time. The older man's expression was one of understanding, not accusation. He wasn't trying to expose Jessica. He was trying to help her. Sergeant, I can't tell you everything, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper, but I can tell you that I'm not who my record says I am. Master Sergeant Davis nodded slowly. I suspected as much, Staff Sergeant. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What happened next would change everything. Master Sergeant Davis would discover Jessica's true identity, and the Army would be forced to confront the reality that they had been hiding one of their most capable tank commanders. Jessica Thompson would finally be recognized for her achievements, and the Army would begin the long process of integrating women into armored combat. But that was still in the future. For now, Jessica Thompson was just another struggling trainee, trying to learn skills that she had already mastered, trying to be someone she wasn't. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same again. The following week brought even more challenges for Jessica. The training exercises became more complex, involving multiple tank formations, different types of terrain, and scenarios that tested not just tank operations, but also leadership and decision-making skills. Jessica found herself constantly walking a tightrope between showing enough competence to pass the course and revealing too much of her real experience. During a particularly challenging exercise involving a simulated armored breakthrough against a fortified enemy position, Jessica was assigned to lead a company of 12 tanks. The scenario required them to breach enemy defenses, exploit the breakthrough, and secure objectives deep in enemy territory. It was exactly the kind of operation Jessica had led dozens of times in real combat, but she had to pretend to be learning it for the first time. Staff Sergeant Thompson, you're in charge of this company, Master Sergeant Davis announced. You have 45 minutes to breach the enemy position and secure your objectives. Go. Jessica immediately fell into her old role, barking out orders with the authority of someone who had commanded in combat. First platoon, establish base of fire. Second platoon, prepare to breach. Third platoon, stand by to exploit. All tanks, maintain proper interval and watch for enemy anti-tank weapons. Her subordinates moved with purpose, following her instructions without question. Jessica coordinated the operation with the efficiency of a veteran, and she could see Master Sergeant Davis watching her with increasing interest. Time's up, Master Sergeant Davis called out. Staff Sergeant Thompson, report your findings. Jessica stood at attention and began her report. Sergeant, we successfully breached the enemy position at 3 points, exploited the breakthrough with 2 platoons, and secured all primary objectives. We destroyed 6 enemy tanks and numerous anti-tank positions. The company suffered no casualties and is ready for follow-on operations. The other trainees looked at her with amazement. She had used terminology and procedures that they hadn't learned yet, and she had organized the operation with a level of professionalism that seemed impossible for someone with her supposed experience. Master Sergeant Davis's expression was unreadable. Staff Sergeant Thompson, where did you learn to command armored formations like that? Jessica felt her heart pounding in her chest. She had slipped up again, revealing knowledge that she wasn't supposed to have. Sergeant, I read about it in the training manual. I've been studying very hard. Really? Master Sergeant Davis said, his voice skeptical. Because that manual doesn't cover half of what you just demonstrated. You move like someone who has done this before, Staff Sergeant, multiple times. The other trainees were watching the exchange with growing interest. They had all noticed that Jessica seemed to know things that weren't taught in class, and they were beginning to wonder about her background. Sergeant, I can explain, Jessica began, but Master Sergeant Davis held up his hand. Not here, Staff Sergeant, my office, now. As Jessica followed Master Sergeant Davis to his office, she could feel the eyes of her fellow trainees on her back. They knew something was up, and they were going to want answers. But Jessica had bigger problems to worry about. Master Sergeant Davis closed the door behind them and sat down at his desk. Staff Sergeant Thompson, I've been patient with you. I've given you the benefit of the doubt, hoping that you would come clean on your own. But this has gone on long enough. Jessica stood at attention, her heart racing. Sergeant, I don't know what you mean. Don't play games with me, Staff Sergeant, Master Sergeant Davis said, his voice sharp. I've been training tank commanders for 20 years. I know what a rookie looks like, and you are not a rookie. You move like someone who has been in combat, who has led tanks in battle, who has made life and death decisions in real time. Jessica felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. Master Sergeant Davis was too experienced, too observant. He had seen through the deception from the beginning, and he was not going to let it continue. Sergeant, I can explain, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then explain, Master Sergeant Davis said, because right now you're looking at a possible Article 15 for falsifying official documents, and that's if you're lucky. If this goes higher up the chain of command, you could be looking at a court-martial. Jessica felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She had known that this was a possibility, but she had hoped that it wouldn't come to this. She had hoped that she could complete her training and return to active duty without anyone discovering the truth. Sergeant, I'm not who my record says I am, Jessica admitted, but I can't tell you everything. Not here, not now. Master Sergeant Davis leaned back in his chair, studying Jessica carefully. Staff Sergeant Thompson, I want you to understand something. I'm not here to destroy your career. I'm here to train you, to make sure you're ready for whatever the Army asks of you. But I can't do that if I don't know who you really are. Jessica looked up, meeting Master Sergeant Davis's eyes. The older man's expression was one of concern, not anger. He wasn't trying to expose Jessica. He was trying to help her. Sergeant, I have a classified service record, Jessica said, choosing her words carefully. I can't discuss the details, but I can tell you that I'm not a rookie. I have combat experience, and I have the training and skills to prove it. Master Sergeant Davis nodded slowly. I suspected as much, Staff Sergeant. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What happened next would change everything. Master Sergeant Davis would help Jessica navigate the bureaucratic maze that had hidden her true identity, and together they would force the Army to confront the reality that they had been hiding one of their most capable tank commanders. Jessica Thompson would finally be recognized for her achievements, and the Army would begin the long process of integrating women into armored combat. But that was still in the future. For now, Jessica Thompson was standing in Master Sergeant Davis's office, her carefully constructed world beginning to unravel around her. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and when it was, nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and bureaucratic red tape. Master Sergeant Davis had taken Jessica's case to his superiors, and the Army's internal investigation machine had begun to turn. Jessica found herself sitting in conference rooms with officers whose rank and authority far exceeded her own, explaining over and over again why she had been forced to hide her true identity. The investigation revealed the full extent of the deception. Jessica Thompson's real service record showed 3 combat tours during Desert Storm, leadership of tank companies in major armored engagements, and decorations that included a Silver Star, an Army Commendation Medal with Valor, and numerous other classified commendations. But more importantly, it showed that she had been one of the most effective tank commanders in the entire theater of operations. The Army's response was swift and decisive. Jessica Thompson was immediately promoted to Master Sergeant and reassigned to a position that matched her actual experience and capabilities. She was given command of an advanced tank training team, where she could use her real knowledge to train the next generation of tank commanders. But the real impact of Jessica Thompson's story went far beyond her personal career. Her case had exposed a fundamental flaw in the Army's policy regarding women in armored combat. The Army had been hiding some of its most capable soldiers simply because of their gender, and Jessica Thompson's story had forced them to confront that reality. Within months of her case being resolved, the Army began the process of officially integrating women into armored combat roles. The policy change was announced with great fanfare, and Jessica Thompson was invited to the Pentagon to witness the signing of the new regulations. As she stood in the Pentagon that day, watching the Secretary of Defense sign the documents that would change the Army forever, Jessica Thompson couldn't help but think about all the other women who had been forced to hide their achievements, all the other soldiers whose contributions had gone unrecognized because of outdated policies and political considerations. Her story had been about more than just one soldier's struggle for recognition. It had been about the fundamental right of every soldier to be judged by their abilities and achievements, not by their gender. It had been about the Army's responsibility to recognize and utilize the talents of all its soldiers, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Jessica Thompson's journey from struggling trainee to recognized armored combat veteran had been long and difficult, but it had also been necessary. Sometimes the truth had to be forced into the light, even when it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. Sometimes the system had to be challenged, even when it seemed too powerful to change. The Army was better for having been forced to confront the reality of Jessica Thompson's service, and Jessica Thompson was better for having been forced to fight for the recognition she deserved. The truth had set her free, and in doing so, it had set the Army free as well. As Jessica Thompson walked out of the Pentagon that day, she knew that her story was far from over. There would be other women following in her footsteps, other soldiers whose achievements would finally be recognized. The Army was changing, and Jessica Thompson had been one of the catalysts for that change. But for now, she was content to return to her new assignment, to use her hard-won knowledge and experience to train the next generation of tank commanders. She had proven that women could serve at the highest levels of armored warfare, and now she had the opportunity to ensure that other women would never have to hide their achievements again. The truth had been worth fighting for, and Jessica Thompson had won her fight. The Army had been forced to acknowledge her service, and in doing so, it had been forced to acknowledge the service of all women who had been willing to put their lives on the line for their country. Jessica Thompson's story was a testament to the power of perseverance, to the importance of standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. It was a story that would inspire other women to follow in her footsteps, to demand the recognition they deserved for their service and sacrifice. The Army would never be the same again, and that was exactly as it should be.